Hey everyone, I'm Nick and welcome back to the channel. Behind me is my 200,000 mile Mercedes S-Class that I bought for only $2,000. Now, as you may have seen in the reveal video, its biggest problem is that it would sink to the ground overnight. The air suspension was leaking down within a few hours, and the compressor was turning on every few minutes. We could hear the struts in the rear actively leaking air. The car made a horrible metal squeaking noise when going over bumps and turning. The compressor sounded like it was on its very last leg, and one of the struts had junkyard markings on it, so we had no idea how many miles were actually on it. Basically, this suspension was roached. It needed to be completely replaced, and at this point, most people would think the car is mechanically totaled because it would cost way too much to fix. Thankfully, that's not at all true thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Max Heating Rods. In fact, today we're going to replace our entire suspension with Max Heating Rods replacement air struts and a compressor for under $800. So let's get to it. Now, if you remember when we drove this, we had a little squeak from the front left. And it kind of looks like this was a replacement that someone got at a junkyard at some point. But the squeaking, I think I found where it came from. And it's not very good. Like, this is sheared off. This is, I don't know, held on to like 2 threads. This one's okay, but someone did something not so good when they installed this piece. And not great that we drove it like this. So since the car's already up in the air, let's get to work. The first step to replace the air struts on this car is to vent the pressure from the struts we're replacing. In our case, that's all 4 corners. I'm using my scan tool to lower the pressure from the front axle and then the rear. If you're only working on one corner at a time, you would want to lower the pressure for that corner only. I'll be aiming for a pressure at or below 50 psi. Without a scan tool, you'll need to be careful when removing the air lines from the struts, since they'll be at their operating pressure. Now for our front struts, let's start by taking a look at how this is all connected. So we've got 3 13mm nuts here. We've got a 10mm brass fitting for the air line. And then down here, we have the bottom of our strut, and that's actually held on. Right there you can see a little hex head screw. And same thing on the other side right there, which we'll have to loosen. And then this is the damping module, and there's a line that runs up here into this connector right there. And so that, there's a little, you can see the metal little hoop there. What we need to do is push down on that, and that should release it, and then this will come out. And this is a dual connector that connects both the damper here and a wheel speed sensors down here. I'm going to work on getting that out as our first step. If you aren't able to free the connector by pressing the metal retainer, you can carefully remove it by pulling it up, which I did with a small screwdriver. And this here's a spring that holds that in. It's pretty tight in this area, and you can actually use a jack under the spring control arm to raise the suspension and give yourself a little more room to maneuver. Go. This is actually the one we're most interested in, which is the one closest to us. And that we can work this down, remove the connector here. You know it runs behind the brake line here, so I can run that back next time. Get that through. And we are free here. Now with the electrical connector disconnected, we can now do the air line. So we're going to want to go slowly because there may be some pressure built up in here. back. And then you get a 13mm socket. Now with the top done, we have to loosen the retaining screws right there. An extension, a 5mm key or wrench. Now to allow the suspension to drop enough for us to remove the strut, we're gonna have to loosen this nut or this ball joint. That is a 17mm. Here I'm going to leave the nut on flush with the threads to catch the suspension when the ball joint breaks loose. I'll be tapping the side of the follower arm to do this. Now you're going to want to be careful as you release this because this is going to come down. Now be careful as you work on this, you don't want to overextend the brake line. You may be able to push the suspension arm down enough to remove the strut, but I ended up needing to use a pry bar for extra leverage. The position I used is not ideal, and I realized later that I was way too close to the brake caliper bleed screw. I found a better way to do it on the other side. I used the control arm for leverage. With the strut free, we can lower it down to remove it. So this is what the bottom of the strut slots onto, and those two screws are removed, lock it in so it won't pop out. Now on the new strut, that's what's going to be slotting over that part. And we want to unscrew the two screws there so that they'll clear when we go to put it on. Now at the top, we also need to remove the new nuts and have them ready for once the strut is in place. Now as we go to put this in, we want the brass fitting to be towards the rear, and that will mean that this valve body for the damping goes towards the front. That is aligned. With the new strut in place on the spring control arm, we'll use a jack to lift it up into place. Again. Go. More. Keep going. Going. A little more. A little more. Okay, so. Drop it down. Yep, perfect. Now right here we have to tighten this back up. It is possible that you'll be able to remove the strut without undoing this. And I was able to install it without it, which was nice. So just pull it in place, and then we'll do the torque in a bit. We'll torque this back to spec, and that's going to start with 20 Newton meters. And then we're going to follow it up by 90 degrees of angle tightening. So you could do that, just turn it 90 degrees. There we go. Next thing we have to do is run our brand new wiring right here. That will run up there, but we have to run this first. Now there's a little grommet holder. We'll have to position that where we need it to go, but in the meantime we're running this through here. Behind this line. And it has to go under here. Now we have to snap this together right here. Okay, snap together. I'll reach in and put our little clip back on. There we go. Put this back in place. And that's our wiring back in place. Now there was a zip tie right here originally, so you may want to put a new one back in. Now for the top, we don't want to torque this until the shock is pressurized. So our next step is going to be to put in our air line. Now for the air line, there are two options. The first one is to reuse your current fitting and screw it into the new strut. And the other option is to remove this fitting and use the one that's included. So for demonstration purposes, I have a piece of line with a fitting that we're going to remove, and we're going to install a new fitting on it. Now there's a little ring right here, and there's a gap there, and we're going to have to pry this ring off so we can get the rest of the fitting off. So you want to be careful not to damage your line. You can use a smaller screwdriver. As you can see here, it started to come out. You may still have to pry a little more. Here we go. And that is the ring coming off. There. And then we can pull this off carefully. And that is the old fitting removed. Now, let's say this is our strut we're putting our new fitting in. Now it may already be on, but you want to make sure you get it started by hand and get it seated properly. Now this fitting gets torqued to 5 Newton meters. That's very light. So I just snug. Now to put your line into the new fitting, you can pull the retainer out and then put your line in. So you push the line in. There you go. And if you still have the paint mark on your line, it'll go to around there, and then it'll stop. And once it stops, if you pull back, it'll lock it in place. So now that's our line fitted to our new fitting. It's secure and it's sealed. You can see right here, our line is secure in here. So that's how you use a new fitting. This is just for demonstration. Do not cut your line to do this. You have to do it in place on the car. What we're going to do here is actually instead to use this fitting. Make sure it's nice and aligned. Get started. And this is very light. It's only 5 Newton meters. So it's really just going to be just snug. Don't force on it. You don't want to damage anything. But that is on. And then we'll come back here later and do these when the shock's pressurized. Now our 2 screws at the bottom go to 20 Newton meters. And that's the front strut done for now, until we air it up, and then we'll torque the top. The top gets torqued at the very end when everything's pressurized, and that's true for all 4 corners. Now on this strut, the process is pretty much the same, except in our case, we'll only have to remove 2 nuts, because this is very damaged. And there's another difference down here, and that's that those 2 bolts or screws that hold the bottom of the strut in are E-torques. And this is specific to this strut. The standard Mercedes part will be a Allen socket. Our dual connector is right there. Our wiring comes down here. It looks like, see, normally there's a zip tie here, some sort of twist tie here right now. Actually, if you remember on the other side, this was run behind the brake line. So maybe we'll run it back there, maybe not. But yeah, and you can push down. Oh, this is zip tied. So you can push it down to release it. Snap in. But if you're not able to push it down to release it, you can also pry it out like I did on the other side. Now, as you can see, this is kind of in the way. So I might jack up the suspension to move this up. cable is held in here with a clip. Okay. That is free. Now I'm actually going to take the opportunity while this is jacked up a little with my floor jack to crack the line up at the top and reduce the air pressure in there. So if I'm able to get more air out than the other side, I may be able to remove the whole strut without undoing the follower joint. No, good. This is supposed to be separate. I'm gonna have to figure out how to stop this from turning. I was able to hold the part on the strut side with some channel locks and break this free. And the reason I had to do that, even though there's potential for this to be damaged, is A, we're not reusing this, and B, if this was stuck together, we would have had to cut the line, make the line shorter, and that's a whole problem we don't really want to deal with. So that's out. Now we can break these free. Yeah. Half a thread? I don't know. That's not good. And it sounds like whoever did this put this on too tight. So it's like... Now down here, we have our little retaining screws, and these happen to be E10. Now, just like on the other side, we're going to loosen the follower arm ball joint. To remove this strut, I used a pry bar against the control arm and pushed up from the bottom. Be careful around the rubber boot on the lower mounting point. I also want to point out that I was supporting the disc with my knees to prevent damage to the brake line. Now while I have the struts out, you can see this is one of the factory ones, the Bilstein. Got this one that I'm putting in, the max speeding rods, and then R-knot here. They're all very, you know, the OEM max speeding rods are very similar shaped. You know, it's very similar style. And then the R-knot, this is their own design, which has a square top and slightly different design here. But yeah. Now right here, we want this to be facing towards the rear again. And I've set up the jack just so later I can raise it up to attach the studs. Don't forget to remove the nuts from the studs so you can actually get it in place. Now before you put it in, you want to loosen these screws as well so that it'll fit over the mounting post, the ball joint. This goes three. Then we're going to lift this a bit while monitoring the top. This goes to 20 Newton meters. Followed by 90 degrees. And then our two screws down here will go to 20 Newton meters. These will get torqued to 20 Newton meters, but only once this has pressure inside, not before. We have to get our new connector in place. Snap these together. And the suspension is already raised up a little bit at this point. Under here. Right into place. And our clip, our metal wire is still in place. And it just snaps into place. It's supposed to. There we go. Probably get a zip tie for this later. It looks good, that loops in here. It looks pretty good. Let's wrap things up here. I'm gonna zip tie these wires together. So we're gonna feed this through this little holder. Now, before we work on the rear struts, there's a couple things to do inside. Now, if you've been wondering what these are, they're not speakers. There's one here and one here. And those are actually covers that let you access the top of the struts in the rear. So to get these off, you want to use a plastic tool and carefully pry up to raise this off. You can just put it aside. It's got a few clips. It's 2 on one side and 1 on the other. You can see right here, we got the airline, we've got a nut here, and 1 right there. Now you may know that this material is pretty soft and it's possible to kind of dent it. So we're also going to be removing this piece of trim, or at least moving it out of the way because the seatbelt goes through it. And then on the other side, it's the same thing. Pry that off. You can see right here, same thing. Got airline and then the 3 studs with the nuts on them. One of the first things we'll do is remove the airline from the top of the strut. You can unscrew the fitting with a 10mm wrench. You can also do this step after removing the trim panel if you want to avoid any damage to it. Now to get better access to the nuts that hold on the top of the strut, we're going to remove this panel. And to do that, the first step is to pull this seal off in this area. So you don't want to grab it and pull it out here. We don't need to pull it all the way out, just enough to clear this panel. I want to pry open the airbag cover here. There's a screw behind there. It's a T30. And then we want to pull this panel forward. You want to be careful because as you touch it, it leaves imprints on it, but as you can see along the back over there, it's clipped in here, and it's also clipped in the front along this piece of trim right here, which will prevent it from sliding forward. So, and then along the bottom, these tabs slot in and you push it in like that. With that panel out of the way, we have a little better access here. We're not going to risk damaging it. And these are still 13s. I'll do the same thing on this side. Pull this trim down. Now I have to grab this panel. And that's held in with these gold clips. So I pull that. There we go. It's free. Now as we saw on this side, our screw goes here, and then there's a clip right here. Right there. So that one would pull up and out if we do that, or straight back from around here. So let's see what we can do. Slide forward. No. Now, as part of removing this shaft, just like in front, we have a little wire that comes off the damping valve, and that runs up along the top of this arm and back, kind of between this shaft and arm, and then it actually goes up here into that little rubber grommet there. So I'm gonna reach in and pull that out. So I'm gonna reach around here and over here, and you can gently pry that out of the body. There we go. Now inside this boot or grommet there's a connector, so I'm going to reach in and use both hands to do that, and I'm going to disconnect it so that our cable is free. And I'm actually going to drop that out on this little clip right here as well. So it turns out you can actually slide this boot back to see the connectors, and that'll make it a lot easier to maneuver in here. So it's a pretty simple connector. Just want to separate it. I think top part comes out. I was able to get the connector undone, and you can see right here this part goes to the shock and it's free. Now I just have to unclip that wire there. Now on the passenger side, it's very similar. It runs here, right there, and then back here, and up by the differential. Similarly, there's a boot you can pull out. You can slide it back and get the connector out too. And like on the other side, there's also a clip right there that we'll have to remove the cable from. Our shock's connected to the spring control arm right here, and that is a 21mm nut. And on the other side, 21mm bolt. But to be able to remove it from the car, we're gonna have to be able to move the spring control arm out of the way. And to do that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna remove this bolt here, which is between the spring control arm and the wheel carrier, and we're gonna remove this link to the stabilizer bar. So this is a 16 with a 22mm on the back if you need. This is a 21. And on the other side right here, you can see, is the E18. So I'm gonna break those free and loosen them up. Now I've already broken these loose, but what we're gonna do now is get my 21mm nut right here. Now the bolt won't come out, so we're gonna have to actually unscrew it out because of the pressure from the strut. There are washers on either side of the spring control arm, which we'll need for reassembly. 16 right here. Okay, you can see that it's starting to turn. Gonna need our 22 right here. Oh, it's not right. That is. That's not right. To disconnect the stabilizer bar link from the wheel carrier, we need to raise the spring control arm to relieve the pressure on it. Yep, that allows this to drop down enough. Pulling that. Lift our strut out. Watch the brake line right here. Okay, next. That's why people take their caliper off. Now, because we want to make some more room here, we're going to loosen this bolt, which is a 12 triple square and an 18 on the other side. It'll swing out of the way when it's loose. There we go. Wow. That is the side out. Now, if you don't want to loosen the bolt for the spring control arm, you can remove your caliper instead. But if you want to leave your caliper in place, you can swing that down and bring it out. If you're not able to raise your car up high enough, it may be worth taking your caliper off. That way you can just work all from here and just hang this out of the way, drop your strut, and pull it out. And now we'll do the same thing on the passenger side. With our old strut out of the car, we can take a look at our replacement from Max Speeding Rods. As you can see, the design is almost identical to the factory strut. As we get ready to install the new shock, we're going to be working by putting it in through here, and then the top is going to go up this way. Now, if you're concerned about working around the brake line, one option you have is to remove the caliper. And to do that, there are two bolts back here. You can see the two bolts right there. So you can undo those and hang the caliper out of the way back there, and that'll give you a little more room to maneuver. That may be useful if you can't get the car up as high to lower that down as far. If you do remove the caliper, the torque spec for those two bolts is 150 Newton meters. Now, our new strut looks very similar, and we're going to be orienting it so that this damper is towards the rear of the car. Now, to get this process started, I'm going to support that arm on my jack. It'll hold it in place while I line it up. And once that's up, I won't push it up because I want to make sure it's lined up with the holes up top. And I'll reach in from the top while it's supported to align it properly and put the nuts in place. Make sure you have your lower strut bolt ready. It'll go in from the front towards the rear of the car. Light interior, protect your seats so you don't get it dirty or stay clean. If you're working on your own, you want to feel for the strut through the openings by the C-pillar. Once you've found the studs on the strut, you can line them as you very slowly raise it up using the floor jack. If you have a helping hand for this job, You could look from the top and tell your helper when to jack up the suspension. In either case, be careful not to pinch your fingers. Okay. Once the strut is raised up into place, you can start the nuts by hand. Only tighten them hand tight for now. Just like up front, we won't torque these down until the strut is pressurized. Now that it's attached up top, we can raise this a little higher. I'm going to work on putting the spring support in place. It can take a little time to find the right position to insert the bolt and stabilizer bar link, but trying different jack support heights and moving the wheel carrier will get you there. Washer back on. We can lower this. End link nut. Just like before, we're putting the damper valve towards the rear. And again, if you want a little more room, remove the brake caliper. The two bolts on the back are 115 Newton meters. And don't forget to remove the nuts. Okay. I'm gonna feed this through. There we go. Now, swing this arm forward. Oop, there we go. Now with that connected, we're gonna raise this up and into place right here. We're gonna want to be careful the rubber here, so you're gonna have to move the disc or the wheel carrier into the right position. You also want to be careful because this could catch on there. With the jack ready to raise the suspension, we can move inside the car to the top. Just like on the other side, we want to make sure the strut is aligned with the mounting holes before we raise it into place. Don't forget to keep your hands clean when you work on the interior, especially if you have a light interior like this one. Right here, you want to be careful that you line it up properly. So it might take a little bit of shimmying so you can get your bolt in. Once the arm's at the right height, you can move the wheel carrier around to align it to get the bolt to go through. And with the bolt in place, you can pop our washer and nut on. And as we lower it, there's a point where the link for the stabilizer bar will be at the right height and you can push it in. There we go. Now that link's back in place and we can put the nut on it. And that is in place, and all we need to do is torque everything except the mounting bolts. The nuts at the top and this bolt, because these need to be torqued when this is pressurized. So starting at the center, we have this bolt here, which is the 12 triple square, and the 18 on the other side. We are doing 50 Newton meters first, as our first step. And the second step is 90 degrees. When you do this, you want to make sure that your opposite side doesn't turn or move. So There we go, 90 degrees. Now, our stabilizer link right here is 40 Newton meters. Fit barely. Then the spring arm to the wheel carrier right up here, which is the E18 and the 21. We'll go to 120 Newton meters. Sorry, because you simultaneously need to stop it from rotating and push, and this is my shorter torque wrench. I may have to get the bigger one. Yeah. Okay, there we go. And then we'll do the exact same thing on the other side. Stabilizer link. And if this turns, if it starts turning when you're tightening, this back part is 22 millimeter. With the right extension, you can torque the wheel carrier bolt without being under the car. And that's everything until we pressurize the struts. Now with our struts in place, it's time to reconnect the damping module. So just unravel this wire right here. And there's a little mounting point right here. So I'm gonna pop that in carefully. There we go. See, it's a floating tab, so don't push too hard. Our next one is right here. Right there. So what we can do first is pull this cover back a bit. Like this. So we can have more cable visible, a little more room to maneuver to plug it in. Right up there. So I'm gonna reach up and connect that. Now that's connected here, and we're gonna slide this back over the cable. And we can actually position this properly to pop it in. Right there. Pull that forward. What we want is for this connector to be inside this rubber piece. So I slid it up into place, and now we just have to pop it into the hole in the body, and there's a little lip on the edge there, so kind of put it in from one side and then work it in. That's in place. Now we can check our cable here is run. Looks good. And it's all in place there. That's good. We can do it on the other side. Same thing here. Prep the connector here. Pop that into the guide. There we go. We may need to see about pulling some through here. There we go, that looks good. Second cable holder's there, but we're going to focus on connecting it first. So we're going to run this up into place here so I can reach up. And we'll do the same thing around this. Right here. The connector will only fit in one way, so you just have to orient it properly. And then we can pull the rubber over the connector. Reach up. I work that back in place. There you go. Once it's in place, it'll sit in the same place the old one was. And we can put about that in place. It's secure. Now we can check our line. A big loop here, huh? Okay, that looks good here. A little bit more slack on this side, but that looks like it'll stay out of the way. That's good. That's all connected in. The last step before airing up the suspension is to connect the air lines to the rear struts. Just like the fronts, you can use the new fittings or reuse the old ones. Be sure to check the condition of the O-ring if you plan on reusing your original fitting. Snug it up. Do the same thing on the other side. There you go. To pressurize the struts, I used my scan tool and brought the pressure in the struts to around 72 psi. So with the system pressurized, they're all holding pressure. We're going to torque these nuts to 20 Newton meters. All right. For the rear struts, the top nuts also get tightened to 20 Newton meters. Now we're going to torque the lower mounting point for the rear suspension. That's 21 on both sides, a nut and bolt. And that is 110 Newton meters. And then the same thing on the other side. Yep. That is the final bolt torqued for the rear suspension. And all the suspension. Now to reinstall this panel, or these panels on both sides, what I did to start is, since we pulled this out, I pulled the metal clips off of the body, which go into these grooves right here, or like kind of gaps right there. And I attached them to the plastic where they were, because it's a lot easier to slide the metal into its position than to slide the trim back into the clip. So having that ready here means that we'll have a little less hard of a time slotting our C-pillar trim back into this slot right here. I also pulled this clip out of here to put it back into the trim. That way it'll snap in. And just as a reminder, these two trims at the bottom will go into the panel right there and slide it. And then up here, these two will pop into these metal clips there. Alright, so we have our seal out. Get our screw back in here. Again. There you go. And that's the trim back in. Now, yeah, this definitely gets bruised up a bit, but hopefully it'll come back. We'll have to see. And we have to just put these guys back on. I did end up making a lot of indents in the C-pillar trim, and while some of it came back, the foam has degraded a fair bit over the past 23 years. I'll let you know if I find a good way to smooth them back out. With the car back on the ground, it aired right up, and then back down to normal height once we switched it out of high mode. So it's the next morning, and as you can see, the suspension didn't sink, and that's good news because it means our system is working right. Oh, and the car got some new tires and a wheel upgrade. Let me know what you think in the comments. Our air suspension's all done. It's back in working order, and it was an easy DIY job. The biggest issues we had were with parts that someone else broke when working on the car. Without those issues, you could easily do this in your driveway or garage in a weekend. The best part about it is that the car rides great, the parts fit just like the factory parts, and all 4 struts and the compressor cost less than just 2 struts from some other manufacturers, let alone directly from Mercedes. If you don't need to replace your entire suspension, it's even cheaper. Although I would recommend replacing the struts in pairs, and at this price, it makes a lot of sense. So a huge thank you to Max Beating Rods for providing the parts for this job. If you're interested in fixing your air suspension on your W220, I'll leave links in the description, so check them out. I know a lot of people think that once the air suspension starts having issues on one of these S-classes, the car is junk, but that's just not the case. With just a few $100 and a little bit of work, these Max Beating Rods can restore your W220's ride. By the way, if you happen to have a different car with an air suspension that's acting up, check out the Max Beating Rods website. They have air suspension replacement for tons of cars, including a number of now cheap European luxury cars that I've had my eye on for a while. Now, as I said earlier, I replaced our very worn compressor with a brand new one from Max Beating Rods, and I'll be showing you that install in the next video. While I was at it, I tried, and failed, to rebuild my old valve block, so I ended up replacing that too. If you'd like to see that mess, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. If this video helped you out, leave a like. And if you've ever had to wrestle with an airmatic suspension, let me know in the comments. If you want to see what else we're going to do to restore and upgrade this car, stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.